At 3 a.m. in the air traffic control tower of McConnell Air Force Base, Kansas, 6 red warning lights suddenly blazed across the primary radar screen. 6 aircraft in emergency status flying straight into a Category 3 hurricane, with winds reaching 120 miles per hour. The smell of hot electronics and burnt coffee filled the cramped control room as lightning illuminated the storm wall approaching from the southwest. "What the heck is Washout Williams doing here?" Colonel Marcus Kane barked. His weathered face twisted in disgust as he spotted Esther sitting at the emergency frequency console. She continued checking weather minimums and adjusting her headset with the precise movements of a seasoned air traffic controller, completely ignoring his verbal assault. Esther kept scanning the weather data display and verifying emergency protocols in the Standard Operating Procedures Manual, her right hand positioned ready beside the radio master switch. Years of muscle memory guided her fingers as she unconsciously tapped Morse code letters T and W on the console edge, a nervous habit she had never quite shaken. But when the radio crackled to life with "Ghost Wing requesting immediate clearance," the entire control room fell silent. That call sign belonged to a pilot who had died 2 years ago, and only Esther knew why it was echoing through the airwaves again tonight. The 8 controllers on duty froze at their stations. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who had worked alongside the original Ghost Wing, slowly straightened in his chair. His experienced eyes darted between the radio and Esther, recognition dawning on his weathered face as he connected the Morse code pattern to the legendary pilot's initials. Kane's face flushed red with anger. "You're grounded from active control, Williams. Don't even think about touching those emergency frequencies." His voice carried across the tower, ensuring every controller heard the public humiliation. Not one of them spoke up in Esther's defense, creating a suffocating moral vacuum that seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. The storm outside intensified, rattling the tower windows as if nature itself was protesting the injustice unfolding within. Esther remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes never left the radar screen where those 6 red dots continued their deadly dance with the approaching hurricane wall. If you have ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly at work simply because of their past, please like and share this video. Do not forget to hit the thanks button to support stories about justice and standing up for what is right. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Hayes, the newest member of the tower crew, shifted uncomfortably at her position. She had heard the stories about Esther Williams, how she used to be one of the most promising combat controllers in the Air Force before everything went wrong. The official record showed a court-martial for insubordination and reckless protocol violations, but the whispered conversations in the break room told a different story. Kane paced behind the control stations like a caged predator, his polished boots clicking against the floor tiles. "I want everyone to understand something," he announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of radio chatter and weather alerts. "This base operates on discipline and proper chain of command. We do not have room for loose cannons or people who think the rules do not apply to them." The colonel's words were clearly directed at Esther, though he spoke to the room at large. She continued her work at the auxiliary console, monitoring backup frequencies and weather updates with the quiet professionalism that had once earned her respect throughout the command. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting dials and checking readings with the smooth precision of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. "Roger, Tower, this is Mercy Flight 73, requesting priority approach," came a voice through the radio. Staff Sergeant Hayes reached for the microphone, but Kane stepped forward and blocked her path. "Let Rodriguez handle it," Kane ordered. "Hayes, you monitor backup frequencies. Williams, you stay off the radio entirely." Master Sergeant Rodriguez acknowledged the medical evacuation flight, but Esther noticed his hands trembling slightly as he worked through the approach clearance. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with crosswinds approaching the maximum limits for safe landing operations. She wanted to offer guidance about fuel consumption rates and emergency approach minimums, but Kane's hostile presence made any intervention impossible. The medical flight reported fuel concerns as it battled headwinds that were stronger than forecasted. Rodriguez struggled with the calculations, his 20 years of experience suddenly feeling inadequate against the complex variables of emergency weather operations. Esther knew the exact specifications by heart: 200-foot ceiling minimum, half-mile visibility required, Category 2 instrument landing system, approach procedures, but she remained silent. Kane noticed Rodriguez's hesitation and stepped closer to the control station. "What is the problem, Sergeant?" "Sir, the fuel calculations are tight with these wind conditions. I am not sure if we have enough margin for a missed approach if needed. Esther shifted in her chair, her professional instincts screaming at her to help. She had performed these calculations countless times during her years as a combat controller, often under far more stressful conditions. The formula was straightforward once you factored in wind speed, aircraft weight, and fuel burn rates, but Rodriguez was second-guessing himself under pressure. "Give me those numbers again, Mercy 7-3, Rodriguez requested, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the air conditioning. As the medical flight repeated their fuel status, Esther quietly whispered the correct approach guidance to herself, her voice barely audible. "Descend to 4,000, reduce speed to 160, expect vectors for ILS, 2-1 approach." Staff Sergeant Hayes caught the whispered instructions and glanced at Esther with surprise. Those were exactly the recommendations Rodriguez should be giving, delivered with the confidence of someone who had guided aircraft through similar emergencies before. The medical evacuation flight managed to land safely, but not without burning more fuel than necessary due to an inefficient approach vector. Rodriguez knew he had made mistakes, and his face showed the stress of nearly compromising aircraft safety. Esther had watched the entire sequence with growing frustration, knowing she could have prevented the dangerous fuel situation. "Good work, Rodriguez," Kane said, though his tone suggested he had also noticed the suboptimal handling of the emergency. Hayes logged the approach times and fuel readings for review. Major Stevens, the operations officer, had been observing from the back of the control room during the medical evacuation. His trained eye caught details that others might miss. How Esther had unconsciously positioned herself to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously, how her fingers moved across backup controls with muscle memory, and how she seemed to anticipate aircraft needs before pilots even requested assistance. "Colonel Kane," Major Stevens said quietly, "might I have a word with you privately?" Kane followed Stevens to the far corner of the control room, where they spoke in hushed tones. Esther could not hear their conversation, but she noticed Stevens glancing in her direction several times. The Major had always been fair in his dealings with personnel, unlike Kane, who seemed to carry personal grudges like badges of honor. "Do you think true leadership means protecting your ego or protecting safety? Comment and share your thoughts below." The weather situation continued to deteriorate as the hurricane's outer bands reached the base. Wind gusts were now exceeding 40 knots, approaching the threshold where normal flight operations would be suspended. The tower crew monitored multiple aircraft, requesting route deviations and altitude changes to avoid the worst turbulence. Esther found herself unconsciously tracking each aircraft's position and fuel status, her mind automatically calculating optimal routing and approach sequences. It was an ingrained habit from her combat controller days, when managing multiple aircraft in hostile environments had been a matter of life and death. Even though Kane had forbidden her from active control duties, her training and instincts could not be simply turned off. "Tower, this is Viper 2-1 declaring emergency," came an urgent voice through the radio. "We have indication of fuel leak from port wing tank." Every controller in the room tensed. Fuel leaks during flight operations were serious emergencies requiring immediate action and expert handling. Lives depended on split-second decisions and flawless execution of emergency procedures. Kane pushed Rodriguez aside and grabbed the microphone himself. "Viper 2-1, Tower, state your intentions and fuel remaining." "Tower, estimate 20 minutes fuel remaining, requesting immediate approach for emergency landing. We are dumping fuel now to reduce fire hazard." Rodriguez started reaching for the emergency checklist, but his hands were shaking from the earlier stress. Kane noticed the sergeant's condition and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Hayes, take over emergency coordination. Rodriguez, step back and monitor." Staff Sergeant Hayes had less than 6 months of tower experience and had never handled a fuel leak emergency. Her face went pale as she realized Kane was putting her in charge of a life-or-death situation that required expertise she simply did not possess. "Sir, I am not qualified for emergency fuel leak procedures," Hayes protested. "You will be fine. Just follow the checklist and use proper radio procedures." Esther watched in horror as Kane deliberately chose an inexperienced controller over someone with proven emergency expertise. She knew every step of the fuel leak emergency checklist, had guided pilots through similar situations multiple times, and understood the critical timing required to ensure safe aircraft recovery. Hayes fumbled with the emergency procedures manual, trying to find the correct section, while Viper 2-1 continued its fuel dump procedure, Precious seconds were being lost as the young sergeant struggled with unfamiliar protocols. Tower, Viper 2-1. We need immediate vectors to final approach. Fuel situation is becoming critical. Viper 2-1, standby, Hayes replied, her voice cracking under pressure. She could not find the right page in the manual and was starting to panic. Esther could no longer remain silent. She quietly moved closer to Hayes and whispered, Page 47, Section 3.2, Vector Heading 270, descend to 3,000 feet. Hayes looked at the base manual and found the exact procedure Esther had cited. Without Kane noticing, she followed Esther's guidance. Viper 2-1, turn left, heading 270, descend and maintain 3,000 feet. Expect vectors to final approach, runway 21. The fighter pilot acknowledged the instructions and began his approach. Hayes continued receiving whispered guidance from Esther, who knew the emergency procedures so well she could recite them from memory. Together, they guided the aircraft through a successful beam emergency landing, though Kane never realized how close they had come to disaster. Major Stevens had observed the entire sequence and made mental notes about the unauthorized coaching that had saved the day. When Kane was not looking, Stevens approached Esther's position. How did you know the exact page reference for fuel leak procedures? He asked quietly. I studied the manuals extensively during my combat controller training, Esther replied. Emergency procedures were part of our core curriculum. Those procedures were updated 6 months ago. How would you know the current page numbers? Esther's silence spoke volumes. Stevens realized she had been keeping herself current on all emergency procedures, despite being barred from active controller duties. Her dedication to maintaining proficiency was remarkable, especially considering Kane's hostile treatment. The Major made a decision that would prove crucial in the hours ahead. Williams, I want you to remain in the tower tonight. We may need additional qualified personnel if this weather situation worsens. Kane overheard Stevens' instruction and immediately objected. Major, I specifically ordered Williams to avoid emergency operations. She is not authorized for active control. Colonel, my authority as operations officer includes personnel assignments during emergency conditions. Williams will remain available as backup support. The tension between Kane and Stevens was palpable. They represented two different philosophies of leadership. Kane's rigid adherence to punishment and Stevens' practical focus on mission accomplishment. Their disagreement would soon be tested by circumstances neither could have anticipated. As if summoned by their conflict, the weather radar screen began showing an ominous development. The hurricane's eye wall was intensifying and shifting direction, putting McConnell Air Force Base directly in the path of the storm's most destructive core. What had been a manageable weather situation was rapidly becoming a life-threatening emergency for every aircraft in the region. All stations, this is Tower, Kane announced. We are upgrading to weather condition red. All non-essential aircraft are to divert immediately. Essential missions only will be permitted to approach. The upgrade to weather condition red meant winds would soon exceed safe operational limits. Aircraft already airborne would need to land quickly or divert to alternate airports, but the storm's size and intensity were limiting available options. Several civilian airports had already closed due to weather, creating a bottleneck of aircraft seeking emergency refuge. Esther monitored the situation with growing concern. Her experience with combat operations in adverse weather gave her a unique perspective on the developing crisis. She could see patterns and potential problems that the other controllers might miss, but Kane's restrictions prevented her from sharing vital insights. The radio frequencies became increasingly congested as more aircraft reported weather-related emergencies. Lightning strikes were affecting navigation equipment, turbulence was causing passenger injuries on commercial flights, and fuel consumption was increasing due to strong headwinds. The tower crew was approaching their maximum capacity for handling emergency traffic. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had recovered from his earlier stress and was now working at peak efficiency, but even his experience was being stretched by the sheer volume of aircraft needing assistance. Staff Sergeant Hayes was improving under pressure, but she still required constant supervision and guidance. The workload was becoming impossible for the available qualified personnel. Tower, this is Air Force Heavy 6-7 requesting immediate priority handling, came a voice that made everyone in the control room stand straighter. The call sign indicated a senior officer's aircraft, possibly carrying general officers or other high-ranking military personnel. Kane personally handled the communication. Air Force Heavy 6-7 Tower, state your request. Tower, we are carrying General Patricia Hayes and staff returning from conference. Request expedited approach due to weather concerns and VIP passenger requirements. General Hayes was the base commander, making her aircraft the highest priority for landing operations. However, the weather was continuing to deteriorate, and the approach would require expert handling to ensure safety. Kane faced a choice between risking the general's safety with inexperienced controllers or accepting help from Esther. Pride won over prudence. Kane assigned Rodriguez to handle the general's approach while maintaining his ban on Esther's participation. However, Rodriguez was already managing 2 other emergency aircraft and was showing signs of fatigue. The margin for error was becoming dangerously thin. Esther watched the developing situation with growing alarm. She could see how the various aircraft positions were creating potential conflicts, how the weather patterns were affecting optimal approach routes, and how fuel considerations were becoming critical for multiple flights. Her combat controller training had prepared her for exactly this type of complex emergency management. The weather monitoring tablet that Esther had been using showed ruggedized construction with a glare-resistant screen that maintained clear visibility even under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the control tower. The device tracked real-time wind shear data and visibility readings, providing essential information for emergency approach guidance in extreme weather conditions where standard equipment proved unreliable. As General Hayes' aircraft began its approach, the weather situation took another turn for the worse. The National Weather Service issued an update upgrading the hurricane to Category 4 intensity, with peak winds now exceeding 150 miles per hour. The eye wall was forecast to pass directly over McConnell Air Force Base within the next 2 hours. Keep watching. A small detail about the call sign Ghost Wing is about to change everything you think you know about this story. All aircraft. This is McConnell Tower, Kane announced. Due to rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, we are implementing immediate emergency procedures. All aircraft currently airborne must land within the next 30 minutes or divert to alternate airports. Runway operations will cease once winds exceed 60 knots sustained. The announcement triggered a cascade of radio calls as pilots requested landing clearances, reported fuel emergencies, and sought routing assistance. The airspace around McConnell became a complex puzzle of aircraft vectors and timing requirements that challenged even the most experienced controllers. Rodriguez was now juggling General Hayes' VIP aircraft, 2 commercial flights with passenger injuries, a military cargo plane low on fuel, and a flight training aircraft with a student pilot who was panicking in the turbulence. His voice remained calm and professional, but Esther could see the stress building in his posture and movements. Staff Sergeant Hayes was handling 2 additional aircraft, but she was approaching her maximum capacity. Any additional emergency would overwhelm her ability to maintain safe separation and proper procedures. The tower crew needed more qualified controllers, but Kane's personal vendetta against Esther was preventing the obvious solution. Tower, this is Emergency 11 declaring Mayday, Mayday, came a desperate voice through the radio. We have multiple casualties from severe turbulence and require immediate medical attention upon landing. Emergency 11 was a civilian medical transport carrying patients being evacuated from a hospital in the hurricane's path. The aircraft had encountered severe turbulence that had injured both patients and medical staff. They needed immediate landing clearance, but the already overloaded controllers were reaching their breaking point. Kane looked around the control room and realized they were facing a crisis that exceeded their current capabilities. Rodriguez was at maximum capacity, Hayes was struggling with her assigned aircraft, and no other qualified controllers were available on short notice. The pride that had prevented him from utilizing Esther's expertise was now threatening the safety of multiple aircraft and dozens of lives. Major Stevens approached Kane with a grim expression. Colonel, we need all available qualified personnel active immediately. The situation is beyond our current staffing levels. We have sufficient controllers on duty, Kane replied stubbornly. Sir, with respect, Rodriguez is handling 5 aircraft simultaneously. Hayes is at her limit with 2, and we now have Emergency 11 requiring immediate assistance. We cannot safely manage this traffic load with current assignments. Kane knew Stevens was right, but admitting it would mean acknowledging that his treatment of Esther had been wrong. His ego battled against his responsibility as tower chief, while aircraft continued their desperate approaches through increasingly dangerous weather conditions. The decision was made for him when Rodriguez suddenly swayed at his position, overwhelmed by stress and fatigue. 20 years of air traffic control experience could not overcome the physical and mental demands of managing multiple simultaneous emergencies in severe weather. He grabbed the edge of his console to steady himself, his face pale and sweating. "Rodriguez, are you all right?" Major Stevens asked, rushing to the sergeant's side. "I need a moment, sir. The workload is intense." Emergency 11 continued calling for immediate assistance, while General Hayes' aircraft was on final approach in dangerous crosswinds. Staff Sergeant Hayes was struggling to maintain separation between her assigned aircraft while monitoring Emergency 11's increasingly desperate calls. The situation was spiraling toward disaster. Kane finally faced the reality that his personal feelings could not override operational necessity. Lives were at stake, and Esther Williams was the only available controller with the experience to handle multiple emergency aircraft in severe weather conditions. His pride would have to take a back seat to saving lives. "Williams," Kane said through gritted teeth, "take over Emergency 11 coordination." Esther moved to an active control position for the first time in 2 years, her hands finding the radio controls with practiced familiarity. The muscle memory was still there, refined by years of combat controller training under the most demanding conditions imaginable. She slipped on a headset and immediately began assessing the tactical situation. "Emergency 11 tower, state your position, fuel remaining, and nature of medical emergency aboard." "Tower, Emergency 11 is 15 miles northwest. Fuel sufficient for 2 approaches. We have 3 injured passengers requiring immediate hospital transport and 1 crew member with possible internal injuries from severe turbulence." Esther's mind instantly calculated the optimal approach sequence. Emergency 11 needed priority handling due to medical urgencies, but General Hayes' aircraft was already committed to its approach and could not safely execute a missed approach in the current weather conditions. The solution required precise timing and expert coordination. Emergency 11, fly heading 180, descend to 4,000 feet, reduce speed to approach minimum. You are number 2 for landing behind military VIP traffic currently on final approach. Tower, request priority ahead of VIP traffic due to medical emergency. Kane started to intervene, knowing that bumping the general's aircraft for a civilian flight would create political problems. But Esther continued with professional authority. Emergency 11, understand medical priority, however VIP traffic is committed final approach and cannot execute missed approach in current weather. Estimate 2-minute delay maximum. Medical personnel have been notified of your arrival. Her decision was tactically sound and demonstrated the kind of professional judgment that had made her legendary as a combat controller. She was balancing competing priorities while maintaining safety margins that less experienced controllers might compromise under pressure. Rodriguez had recovered enough to continue handling his assigned aircraft, but he watched Esther work with something approaching awe. Her radio communications were crisp and confident, her aircraft separation was textbook perfect, and her coordination with other agencies was seamless. This was how emergency air traffic control was supposed to be performed. General Hayes' aircraft touched down safely despite the challenging crosswinds, clearing the runway for Emergency 11's priority approach. Esther guided the medical transport through an approach that minimized exposure to wind shear while ensuring adequate spacing from other traffic. Her performance was flawless, exactly what would be expected from someone with her background and training. "Nice work on Emergency 11, Major Stevens said quietly. "That was professional-grade air traffic control." Kane said nothing, but his expression showed grudging acknowledgement that Esther had handled the emergency better than anyone else in the tower could have managed. His personal animosity remained unchanged, but he could not deny her competence when lives were at stake. The medical transport landed safely and taxied to the emergency services area where ambulances were waiting. 3 passengers and 1 crew member were quickly transported to the base hospital for treatment of their turbulence-related injuries. The successful coordination had prevented a potential tragedy while maintaining safety standards throughout the approach sequence. But the night was far from over. The weather radar showed the hurricane's eye wall continuing to intensify as it moved directly toward McConnell Air Force Base. What they had experienced so far was merely the outer edge of the storm. The worst was yet to come, and the tower crew would soon face challenges that would test every aspect of their training and experience. As if responding to their momentary success, the radio crackled with a transmission, that made everyone in the control room freeze. The voice was clear and professional, using standard phraseology, but the call sign sent chills through every person who heard it. McConnell Tower, this is Ghostwing Flight requesting immediate clearance for emergency approach. We have 6 aircraft, multiple fuel emergencies, and are encountering severe weather conditions. Request priority handling. The silence in the control room was deafening. Ghostwing had been the call sign of Major Tom Williams, one of the most respected combat controllers in Air Force history. But Tom Williams had died 2 years ago in a training accident, making the radio transmission impossible unless someone was deliberately using his call sign. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stood up slowly, his face showing recognition and confusion. He had worked closely with Tom Williams and knew the voice patterns, radio techniques, and professional demeanor that had made the Major legendary among air traffic controllers. But Tom was dead, killed when his aircraft crashed during a weather reconnaissance mission. Kane's face flushed with anger as he realized what was happening. Someone was using the call sign of a dead war hero, possibly as some kind of sick joke or unauthorized honor. The timing was particularly inappropriate, coming in the middle of a genuine emergency situation when professional focus was essential. "Negative, Ghostwing," Kane replied harshly. "That call sign is not authorized for current operations. Identify yourself properly and state your actual aircraft designation." McConnell Tower, Ghostwing Flight Authentic. We have emergency authorization for operations under original call sign designation. Request immediate approach clearance for 6 aircraft in formation. The voice remained calm and professional despite Kane's hostile response. Whoever was using Tom Williams' call sign clearly understood proper radio procedures and was not intimidated by the tower chief's aggressive challenge. The situation was becoming increasingly surreal as the hurricane continued its approach toward the base. Esther had been listening to the exchange with growing recognition. The voice patterns, the phraseology, even the precise pronunciation of technical terms matched her memories of countless hours spent training under Tom Williams' guidance. But she knew with absolute certainty that her husband was dead, killed in an aircraft accident that had devastated her personally and professionally. The emotional impact of hearing Tom's call sign again was overwhelming, but Esther forced herself to focus on the practical aspects of the situation. 6 aircraft requesting emergency approach in severe weather represented a massive coordination challenge. Whether the transmission was authentic or not, those aircraft needed professional handling to ensure safe recovery. Kane was struggling to process the impossible radio transmission while maintaining control of an increasingly chaotic air traffic situation. The hurricane was continuing to intensify. More aircraft were reporting emergencies, and now he faced the psychological pressure of dealing with a call sign that belonged to a dead pilot. "All stations, this is Tower," Kane announced. "We have an unidentified aircraft or flight using unauthorized call sign Ghostwing. Do not acknowledge transmissions from this source until proper identification is established." But Rodriguez had made a different decision. His 20 years of experience included extensive work with classified and special operations aircraft that often used unusual call signs and procedures. If someone had legitimate authorization to use Tom Williams' call sign, interfering with their emergency could have serious consequences. "Tower, Rodriguez here. I will handle Ghostwing communication on backup frequency to verify authorization while primary frequency handles standard traffic." Kane wanted to object, but the practical solution made sense given their limited resources and the continuing emergency workload. Rodriguez switched to a secondary radio frequency to communicate with the mysterious Ghostwing flight, while the primary controllers continued handling the other aircraft approaching McConnell. "Ghostwing, McConnell approach control on frequency 254.7. State your aircraft type, number of souls on board, and nature of emergency." McConnell approach, Ghostwing flight consists of 6 F-16 aircraft with 4 pilots and 2 weapon systems officers total. Multiple aircraft reporting minimum fuel due to hurricane headwinds. We require immediate approach clearance and emergency services standing by. Rodriguez felt his blood run cold. 6 F-16 fighters approaching in formation during a hurricane represented one of the most challenging air traffic control scenarios imaginable. Fighter aircraft had limited fuel capacity compared to larger planes, making their fuel emergencies particularly urgent. Coordinating 6 simultaneous approaches in severe weather would require exceptional skill and experience. Ghostwing, what is your estimated fuel remaining? McConnell approach, lead aircraft has 8 minutes fuel remaining, trailing aircraft estimate between 6 and 10 minutes. We cannot divert to alternate airports due to storm coverage and fuel limitations. 8 minutes of fuel remaining meant the lead F-16 was approaching emergency reserves. If Rodriguez could not get all 6 aircraft on the ground within the next few minutes, pilots would be forced to eject over hostile terrain in hurricane conditions. The margin for error had effectively disappeared. Kane realized the situation had escalated beyond his ability to manage through normal procedures. 6 F-16 aircraft represented millions of dollars in equipment and, more importantly, the lives of 6 aircrew members. Whether the call sign was authorized or not, those pilots needed immediate assistance to survive. Rodriguez, bring Ghostwing flight to primary frequency for coordination with tower operations, Kane ordered reluctantly. Ghostwing, contact McConnell Tower on frequency 249.1. Emergency approach clearance will be coordinated by tower personnel. Rodriguez switched back to the primary tower frequency and briefed Kane on the developing situation. 6 F-16 aircraft with critically low fuel approaching during hurricane conditions, while the tower was already managing multiple other emergencies. The workload was about to exceed anything they had ever experienced. Esther listened to the briefing with professional interest, mixed with emotional turmoil. The tactical situation was exactly the type of complex emergency coordination that had been her specialty as a combat controller. She understood fighter aircraft fuel limitations, formation approach procedures, and weather considerations better than anyone else in the tower. But the Ghostwing call sign continued to haunt her. Tom Williams had earned that designation through exceptional performance during combat operations, and hearing it again brought back memories of their training sessions together. He had taught her everything about managing multiple aircraft in hostile environments, but she had never expected to use those skills under these circumstances. Kane faced an impossible choice. His personal animosity toward Esther was strong, but the approaching emergency would require every available qualified controller working at maximum efficiency. Rodriguez was already handling other aircraft. Hayes was at her limit, and no additional personnel were available on short notice. The hurricane continued its relentless approach toward McConnell Air Force Base, bringing with it the most challenging night in the tower's operational history. 6 F-16 fighters were running out of fuel in severe weather. Multiple other aircraft still needed recovery assistance, and the available controllers were being pushed beyond their normal capabilities. As the eye wall drew closer, Esther Williams prepared to face her past and prove that some skills transcend personal conflicts and professional politics. The Ghostwing call sign would soon reveal secrets that had been buried for 2 years, changing everything Kane thought he knew about the woman he had worked so hard to destroy. The wind outside the tower was now howling at sustained speeds approaching 50 knots, with gusts exceeding 70. Lightning illuminated the storm clouds with increasing frequency, creating a strobing effect that made visual approaches impossible. All aircraft would need to rely on instrument approaches, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. Kane looked around the control room and realized that pride had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The approaching crisis would test every aspect of their training, experience, and professionalism. Personal feelings would have to be set aside in favor of saving lives and protecting aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Williams," Kane said quietly, his voice barely audible over the storm noise, "prepare to assist with Ghostwing approach coordination. We need all available qualified personnel active immediately." Esther nodded and moved to a primary control position, her hands finding the radio controls with muscle memory developed through years of high-stress operations. She had waited 2 years for this moment, the chance to prove that her skills remained sharp, despite Kane's efforts to destroy her career. The Ghostwing flight was about to test everything she had learned from Tom Williams about managing impossible situations under extreme pressure. But first, she would have to confront the mystery of who was using her dead husband's call sign and why they had chosen this particular night to return from the past. The radio crackled again with the familiar voice that had haunted her dreams for 2 years. "McConnell Tower, Ghostwing flight is 15 miles southeast, requesting vectors for immediate approach. We are approaching minimum fuel and require emergency services standing by." Kane grabbed the microphone, his voice tense with the pressure of the developing crisis. "Ghostwing flight, McConnell Tower, You are cleared for immediate approach, runway 21. Turn left, heading 360, descend to 5,000 feet. Emergency services are being notified. McConnell Tower, Ghost Wing copies. Turning left 360, descending to 5,000. Be advised we have weather radar showing severe turbulence on approach path. Request guidance for optimal approach routing. The professionalism in the transmission was unmistakable. Whoever was using Tom Williams's call sign clearly possessed the knowledge and experience to handle emergency approaches in severe weather. Their requests for guidance demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed even Kane, despite his suspicions about the unauthorized call sign usage. Esther found herself unconsciously reaching for the worn challenge coin in her pocket. Not her own coin, but one that had belonged to Major Tom Williams. She had carried it every day since his death, a tangible reminder of the training and guidance he had provided during their time together. The coin bore his call sign Ghost Wing, engraved with precision, along with the date of his last successful mission. The weight of the coin in her hand triggered memories of countless training sessions, where Tom had taught her the subtle skills that separated competent controllers from exceptional ones. He had emphasized the importance of thinking 3 steps ahead, of anticipating pilot needs before they were expressed, and of maintaining calm professionalism under the most extreme pressure. Rodriguez noticed Esther's body language and recognized the signs of someone preparing for intense mental focus. He had seen that same posture during combat operations when controllers were about to handle life-or-death situations. Whatever personal issues existed between Kane and Williams, Rodriguez knew they needed her expertise for the approaching crisis. Ghost Wing Flight, McConnell Tower, Kane continued. Be advised we have multiple aircraft in the pattern ahead of you. Expect vectors and possible holding instructions due to traffic separation requirements. Negative McConnell Tower. Fuel state does not permit holding. We require immediate straight-in approach, or we will have aircraft running out of fuel. This is a fuel emergency for all 6 aircraft. The blunt response caught Kane off guard. Military pilots were trained to be polite and deferential to air traffic control, but the Ghost Wing flight leader was stating operational limitations with unmistakable authority. The implication was clear. Any delay in approach clearance would result in aircraft running out of fuel and pilots being forced to eject. Kane looked at the radar screen showing the positions of all aircraft in the vicinity. General Hayes had already landed safely. Emergency 11 was clear of the runway, but 2 commercial flights and a cargo aircraft were still in the approach pattern. Fitting 6 F-16 fighters into the sequence would require careful coordination and split-second timing. Esther, Rodriguez said quietly, you have more experience with fighter formation approaches than anyone here. Kane is going to need help with the sequence planning. Kane overheard the comment and struggled with his pride once again. Rodriguez was right. Esther's combat controller background included extensive work with fighter aircraft under emergency conditions. Her expertise could mean the difference between successful recovery and multiple aircraft being lost to fuel exhaustion. The hurricane's approach was becoming more intense by the minute. Wind shear alerts were being issued for all approach paths, visibility was dropping due to rain and debris, and lightning strikes were affecting navigation equipment throughout the region. The weather conditions were approaching the absolute limits for safe flight operations. Williams, Kane said reluctantly, what do you recommend for Ghost Wing approach sequence? Esther studied the radar display, calculating aircraft positions, fuel limitations, and weather considerations with the speed that had made her legendary during her combat controller days. Her mind automatically processed dozens of variables to develop an optimal solution that would maximize safety while minimizing fuel consumption. Clear the pattern of all non-emergency traffic immediately, she recommended. Vector Ghost Wing flight for straight-in approach, runway 21 with 2-mile spacing between aircraft. Coordinate with emergency services for multiple aircraft recovery. Have crash and rescue equipment positioned at runway midpoint and departure end. Her analysis was thorough and professional, delivered with the confidence of someone who had managed similar situations under combat conditions. Kane could find no fault with her recommendations, though admitting their validity would mean acknowledging her competence in front of the entire tower crew. The weather monitoring tablet continued providing critical information about wind patterns and turbulence levels along the approach path. Real-time data showed wind shear zones that could overwhelm fighter aircraft already operating at minimum fuel levels. Esther incorporated this information into her approach planning, selecting routing that would minimize exposure to the most dangerous atmospheric conditions. Ghostwing Flight was now 12 miles from the runway and approaching the point where fuel considerations would become critical. F-16 aircraft had limited endurance under the best conditions, and fighting hurricane headwinds had consumed fuel at rates well above normal operational planning. Every minute of delay increased the risk of aircraft running out of fuel before reaching the runway. "McConnell Tower, Ghostwing lead," came the increasingly urgent voice on the radio. "We are showing 6 minutes fuel remaining on lead aircraft. Request immediate clearance for approach." Kane realized they were rapidly approaching the point of no return. If Ghostwing Flight could not land within the next few minutes, pilots would begin ejecting over terrain that was becoming increasingly dangerous due to the hurricane's approach. The responsibility for 6 lives and millions of dollars in aircraft rested squarely on his shoulders. "Ghostwing Flight, McConnell Tower, you are cleared for immediate approach runway 21. Contact final approach, control on frequency 119.7 for landing sequence coordination." "Roger, McConnell Tower, Ghostwing Flight switching to approach control." Rodriguez took over final approach coordination, while Kane continued managing tower operations. The handoff was smooth and professional, demonstrating the kind of teamwork that had made McConnell's air traffic control operation one of the most respected in the Air Force. But as Ghostwing Flight began its approach, something unexpected happened that would change everything. The lead aircraft transmitted a final radio call that sent shockwaves through everyone who heard it. "Approach control, Ghostwing lead. Be advised this flight is operating under special authorization from Air Combat Command. Our mission is classified, but we are cleared to use historical call signs for operational security purposes. Ghostwing 6 out." The transmission revealed that the mysterious flight was not someone playing games with a dead pilot's call sign, but rather an authorized operation using Ghostwing as operational cover. The implications were staggering. It meant the Air Force had deliberately chosen to resurrect Tom Williams' call sign for reasons that remained classified. Esther felt her hands trembling as she realized what the transmission meant. Someone in the Air Force hierarchy had authorized the use of her dead husband's call sign, bringing back memories and emotions she had spent 2 years trying to suppress. The professional part of her mind continued tracking the approaching aircraft, but her personal emotions were in turmoil. Kane's expression showed his own confusion about the developing situation. If Ghostwing Flight was operating under legitimate authority, then his earlier hostility toward their transmissions could be seen as interfering with a classified mission. The political implications were potentially serious, especially if senior officers learn about his initial refusal to provide assistance. The 6 F-16 aircraft appeared on the approach radar, flying in perfect formation despite the challenging weather conditions. Their navigation was precise, their spacing was textbook perfect, and their radio communications demonstrated the highest levels of professionalism. Whoever was leading the flight clearly possessed exceptional skills and extensive experience with formation flying. Rodriguez provided approach guidance with his characteristic calm efficiency, vectoring the fighters through optimal routing while coordinating with the tower for runway preparation. Emergency services had positioned crash and rescue equipment as Esther had recommended, ready to respond instantly if any aircraft experienced difficulties during landing. Ghostwing Flight, you are cleared to land runway 21, wind 340 at 48, gusting to 65. Caution, wake turbulence from preceding heavy aircraft. Ghostwing Flight cleared to land runway 21, wind noted. The lead F-16 touched down smoothly despite the challenging crosswinds, demonstrating piloting skills that impressed even the experienced controllers. The remaining 5 aircraft followed at precise intervals, each landing executed with textbook precision despite fuel levels that were approaching emergency minimums. As the last Ghostwing aircraft cleared the runway, the tower crew experienced a collective sense of relief. 6 pilots had been saved from potential ejection in hurricane conditions. Millions of dollars in aircraft had been recovered safely, and the most challenging formation approach any of them had ever coordinated was complete. But Kane's relief was short-lived. As he watched the 6 F-16 aircraft taxi toward the parking area, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The lead aircraft bore tail markings that he recognized from intelligence briefings, markings associated with classified test programs that operated under special authorization from the highest levels of Air Force command. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Ghostwing Flight was not just any random formation using an unauthorized call sign. They were part of a classified operation that he had initially tried to deny assistance, potentially compromising national security interests and endangering pilots whose mission remained hidden behind layers of official secrecy. Esther watched the aircraft taxi to their parking positions with mixed emotions. Professional satisfaction at coordinating a successful emergency recovery competed with personal anguish at hearing Tom's call sign again. She had not expected the psychological impact to be so intense, and she struggled to maintain her composure in front of the other controllers. Major Stevens observed the entire sequence with growing respect for both Rodriguez's approach control skills and Esther's tactical planning. The successful recovery of 6 fighter aircraft in hurricane conditions was a testament to the professionalism and expertise of the tower crew. He made mental notes about performance evaluations that would need to reflect the exceptional work performed under pressure. But the night was far from over. The hurricane's eye wall was still approaching McConnell Air Force Base, bringing with it winds that would exceed the limits for safe ground operations. Aircraft that had successfully landed would need to be secured against the storm, while any remaining airborne traffic would face increasingly dangerous conditions. Kane surveyed the control room and realized that the Ghost Wing approach had been merely a preview of the challenges ahead. Weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate, more aircraft were reporting emergencies, and the tower crew was already operating at maximum capacity. The worst of the storm was yet to come. As he prepared for the final phase of the night's operations, Kane could not shake the feeling that the Ghost Wing incident had exposed serious gaps in his leadership and decision-making. His personal animosity toward Esther Williams had nearly interfered with a classified mission, and his pride had prevented him from utilizing available expertise when lives were at stake. The approaching eye wall would test everything they had learned about emergency operations, but it would also force Kane to confront the consequences of his treatment of Esther Williams. The night that had begun with personal conflicts and professional grudges was about to become a crucible that would determine whether leadership meant protecting ego or protecting lives. Outside the tower, the hurricane continued its relentless approach, bringing with it challenges that would require the very best from everyone involved. The Ghost Wing call sign had returned from the past to haunt McConnell Air Force Base, but it had also brought with it skills and knowledge that would prove essential for surviving the storm ahead. As the wind howled around the tower and lightning illuminated the approaching wall of clouds, Esther Williams prepared to face the greatest test of her career. The secrets surrounding Tom Williams's death and the mystery of the Ghost Wing call sign would soon be revealed, changing everything Kane thought he knew about the woman he had tried so hard to destroy. The radio crackled one final time as the last of the evening's routine traffic contacted the tower. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same for any of them. The hurricane was about to strip away more than just buildings and equipment. It would also tear away the facades and pretenses that had hidden the truth for far too long. The 6 F-16 aircraft had barely finished taxiing to their assigned parking spots when the primary weather radar screen lit up with an alarming display of red and purple cells. The hurricane's eye wall was now less than 20 miles from McConnell Air Force Base, bringing with it sustained winds that would soon exceed 160 miles per hour. What had been a challenging weather situation was rapidly becoming a catastrophic emergency that would test every aspect of the base's disaster preparedness. Kane stared at the radar display with growing dread. The eye wall was moving faster than initially forecast, compressing the timeline for securing aircraft and personnel before conditions became unsurvivable. Ground operations would need to cease within the next 30 minutes, leaving any remaining airborne aircraft with no option for landing at McConnell. "All stations, this is Tower," Kane announced over the primary radio frequency. "We are upgrading to weather condition black. All flight operations will cease in 30 minutes. Any aircraft currently airborne must land immediately or divert to alternate airports outside the storm track." The announcement triggered an immediate response from multiple aircraft that had been holding in the vicinity, waiting for improved conditions. Commercial flights, military cargo aircraft, and private planes all began requesting immediate landing clearances as pilots realized their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Rodriguez counted the aircraft positions on his radar screen and felt his stomach tighten. 11 aircraft were requesting immediate approach, but runway capacity and weather limitations would allow only 6 or 7 safe landings before conditions became too dangerous. 4 or 5 aircraft would be forced to divert to airports hundreds of miles away, assuming they had sufficient fuel to reach alternate destinations. "Tower, this is United 47 requesting immediate approach," came an urgent voice. "We have 160 passengers and are showing minimum fuel for divert options." "United 47 Tower, you are number 6 for approach. Expect 15-minute delay for landing clearance." "Tower, negative on 15-minute delay. We do not have fuel for extended holding. Request priority approach immediately." Kane realized they were facing an impossible situation. Multiple aircraft had legitimate claims for priority handling, but physical limitations meant not everyone could be accommodated. The decisions made in the next few minutes would determine which flights landed safely and which would be forced into desperate fuel situations. Esther listened to the radio exchanges with growing concern. Her combat controller experience included managing aircraft recovery operations under extreme time pressure, but the current situation exceeded anything she had encountered during military service. 11 aircraft competing for limited runway time, while a hurricane approached, represented a coordination challenge that would require flawless execution. "Kane," she said quietly, "we need to prioritize based on fuel remaining and passenger load. Commercial aircraft with the lowest fuel should land first, followed by military cargo, then general aviation. Private aircraft have more divert options than airliners." Kane wanted to reject her input on principle, but the logic was undeniable. Commercial aircraft carried the most passengers and had the least flexibility for alternate routing. Military cargo flights had priority due to their mission importance, while private aircraft typically had more fuel reserves and better alternate airport options. "Rodriguez, coordinate with all aircraft for fuel remaining and souls on board," Kane ordered. "We will prioritize based on fuel emergency status and passenger load." The next 10 minutes became a masterclass in air traffic control under extreme pressure. Rodriguez efficiently gathered information from each aircraft while calculating optimal approach sequences. Hayes monitored emergency frequencies for updates from aircraft experiencing mechanical problems. Esther provided tactical advice based on her extensive experience with high-stress coordination scenarios. United 47 reported only 12 minutes of fuel remaining, making them the highest priority for immediate landing. American 68 had 15 minutes of fuel, but carried 230 passengers, placing them second in the sequence. A military cargo flight with classified materials took third priority, despite having adequate fuel reserves. The weather continued its relentless deterioration as the eye wall approached. Wind speeds at runway level were now approaching 45 knots sustained, with gusts exceeding 70 knots. Lightning strikes were occurring every 30 seconds, creating electromagnetic interference that affected navigation equipment and radio communications. "Tower, United 47 on final approach," Rodriguez announced. "Winds are now 40 degrees at 45 knots, gusting to 70. Caution severe wind shear on short final." United 47, winds noted. "You are cleared to land runway 21. Emergency services are standing by." The commercial airliner fought through the turbulent approach, wings rocking in the severe crosswinds as the pilots struggled to maintain runway alignment. The aircraft touched down hard but safely, immediately applying maximum braking to stop before the strong winds could push them off the runway center line. "American 68, you are cleared for immediate approach, runway 21, Rodriguez continued without pause. "Caution, wake turbulence from preceding heavy aircraft and expect severe wind shear throughout approach." As American 68 began its approach, the weather radar showed an ominous development. A microburst cell was forming directly over the approach end of runway 21, creating downdrafts that could slam aircraft into the ground without warning. The timing was catastrophic. The airliner was already committed to the approach and lacked fuel for a missed approach attempt. "American 68 Tower," Kane transmitted urgently. "Be advised severe downdraft activity over approach end runway 21. You may execute missed approach if conditions appear unsafe." "Tower, American 68, we do not have fuel for missed approach. We are committed to landing." Esther watched the radar display showing the microburst development with growing alarm. She had seen similar weather phenomena during combat operations and understood the lethal danger they posed to aircraft on approach. The downdrafts could exceed 3,000 feet per minute, overwhelming any aircraft's ability to maintain altitude during the critical final approach phase. "Kane, that microburst is going to hit them right at decision height," she warned. "They need guidance for wind shear recovery procedures." Kane hesitated, knowing that Esther's expertise could save the aircraft, but unwilling to publicly acknowledge her competence in front of the tower crew. His pride battled against his responsibility as lives hung in the balance 2 miles from the runway. The decision was made for him when American 6-8 encountered the microburst exactly as Esther had predicted. The aircraft suddenly dropped 300 feet in 5 seconds as the downdraft overwhelmed the engine's ability to maintain altitude. The pilots fought for control as wind shear alarms screamed in their cockpit. "American 6-8 is in severe wind shear," the pilot transmitted, his voice strained with the effort of fighting the aircraft controls. Unable to maintain glide path, Esther grabbed the backup microphone without waiting for Kane's permission. "American 6-8 tower, increase power immediately to maximum available thrust. Lower the nose to maintain airspeed. Do not attempt to arrest descent until clear of downdraft." Her instructions were delivered with the calm authority of someone who had guided aircraft through similar emergencies. The technique she recommended was counterintuitive, allowing the aircraft to descend while maintaining airspeed, but it was the only way to survive a severe microburst encounter. "American 6-8, power is at maximum. We are descending through 500 feet. American 6-8, maintain maximum power and forward airspeed. You should break out of the downdraft in approximately 10 seconds. Kane watched in amazement as Esther's guidance proved accurate. American 6-8 emerged from the microburst at 200 feet above the ground, airspeed and altitude stabilizing as the pilots regained control. The aircraft continued to a successful landing, saving 230 passengers from what could have been a catastrophic crash. "Outstanding work, Williams," Rodriguez said quietly. "That was textbook wind shear recovery guidance." Kane said nothing, but his expression showed grudging acknowledgement that Esther had prevented a disaster through expert knowledge and quick thinking. Her intervention had saved hundreds of lives, while demonstrating the combat controller skills that he had worked so hard to discredit. The successful recovery of American 6-8 cleared the runway for the remaining aircraft, but time was running out rapidly. The Hurricane's eye wall was now visible on the horizon, as a towering wall of black clouds illuminated by constant lightning. Ground wind speeds were approaching the maximum limits for aircraft operations, and runway closure was imminent. Commander Bryant secured cutting-edge emergency response tablet with reinforced casing, advanced GPS tracking, and encrypted communication protocols for coordinating multiple agency responses during natural disasters, where standard communication infrastructure becomes unreliable or compromised. All aircraft, this is McConnell Tower," Kane announced. "Runway operations will cease in 15 minutes due to extreme weather conditions. Aircraft currently on approach are cleared to land. All other aircraft must divert immediately to alternate airports." The announcement created panic among the remaining pilots who had been hoping for landing slots. 4 aircraft were still airborne, with fuel situations that made long-distance diversions questionable. Their options were becoming limited as airports throughout the region implemented their own weather-related closures. "Tower, this is Cessna 87 Delta requesting emergency landing," came a voice that was clearly strained with fear. "I am a student pilot on solo cross-country and am not qualified for instrument approaches at alternate airports. Request permission to land immediately." Kane looked at the radar screen and saw the small aircraft symbol representing a single-engine Cessna with a student pilot who was clearly overwhelmed by the deteriorating conditions. The young pilot was flying visual flight rules in weather that was rapidly becoming impossible for visual navigation. "Cessna 87 Delta, what is your flying experience and instrument qualifications?" "Tower, I have 60 hours total time and no instrument rating. I cannot fly in these weather conditions to another airport." The situation represented every air traffic controller's nightmare, an inexperienced pilot trapped by weather in conditions beyond their skill level. Student pilots were trained for fair weather flying and lacked the experience to handle instrument approaches or severe weather navigation. Without immediate assistance, the young aviator faced almost certain disaster. Esther felt her protective instincts engage as she listened to the student pilot's increasingly desperate transmissions. The voice reminded her of young military pilots she had worked with during her combat controller days, eager and well-trained in basic skills, but lacking the experience to handle emergency situations. "Kane, that student needs immediate priority handling," she advised. "Student pilots cannot safely navigate to alternate airports in these conditions. We have to get him on the ground here. We have commercial and military traffic ahead of him, Kane replied. Student pilot does not take priority over aircraft with more souls on board. That student pilot will die if he tries to reach an alternate airport, Esther said bluntly. Commercial aircraft have instrument-rated crews and weather radar. The Cessna has neither. Kane realized she was right, but admitting it would mean bumping other aircraft that also had legitimate claims for priority handling. The decision required balancing multiple competing factors while the available time continued to shrink. The moral dilemma was resolved when one of the commercial flights reported sufficient fuel to reach an alternate airport outside the storm track. The captain volunteered to divert, freeing up a landing slot for the student pilot who lacked the skills and equipment for long-distance navigation in severe weather. Cessna 87 Delta, you are cleared for immediate approach runway 21, Rodriguez announced. Turn left heading 360, descend to 2,000 feet. We will provide step-by-step guidance for instrument approach. Tower, thank you. I do not know how to do instrument approaches. Cessna 87 Delta, no problem. We will talk you through every step. Just follow our instructions exactly and you will be fine. Rodriguez began providing detailed guidance for the student pilot, explaining each step of the instrument approach process in terms a novice could understand. His patience and professionalism were remarkable, considering the time pressure and stress of the overall situation. Esther monitored the approach with professional interest, ready to provide assistance if Rodriguez needed help with the unusual situation. Talking down a student pilot in severe weather required exceptional communication skills and intimate knowledge of aircraft performance characteristics. Cessna 87 Delta, reduce power to 1500 RPM, maintain heading 360, begin descent at 500 feet per minute. Tower, reducing power, maintaining heading, beginning descent. The small aircraft appeared on the approach radar, its track slightly erratic as the student pilot struggled with the unfamiliar procedures. Crosswinds were affecting the Cessna more severely than the larger aircraft, requiring constant heading corrections to maintain runway alignment. Cessna 87 Delta, you are right of course. Turn left 5 degrees to heading 355. Reduce descent rate to 300 feet per minute. Rodriguez's guidance was flawless, demonstrating the kind of professional expertise that had made him one of the most respected controllers in the Air Force. His calm voice and clear instructions provided the student pilot with confidence needed to continue the approach despite challenging conditions. The Cessna touched down safely, though the landing was rougher than textbook standards due to the crosswinds and the pilot's limited experience. The important thing was that another life had been saved through expert air traffic control and professional teamwork under extreme pressure. Nice work, Rodriguez, Esther commented. That was exceptional controller work under pressure. Kane watched the successful recovery, with growing recognition that his tower crew was performing at extraordinary levels despite the challenging conditions. Rodriguez's skill with the student pilot, Hayes's steady support with communications, and Esther's tactical guidance were combining to create success rates that exceeded normal expectations. But their temporary success was overshadowed by the approaching eye wall, which was now less than 10 miles from the base. Winds were approaching the absolute limits for ground operations, and the decision to close runway operations could not be delayed much longer. All aircraft, this is McConnell Tower. Runway operations will cease in 5 minutes due to extreme weather conditions. This is the final call for aircraft requesting landing at McConnell Air Force Base. 2 military cargo aircraft and 1 corporate jet remained in the pattern, all requesting immediate landing clearances. Their fuel situations were adequate for diversion, but the approaching weather was making alternate airports increasingly unavailable as the storm system expanded across the region. Tower, this is Air Force Cargo 77, requesting immediate landing, came a transmission that carried unmistakable authority. We are carrying classified materials that cannot be diverted to civilian airports. Request priority handling. Kane recognized the call sign as belonging to a Special Operations Command aircraft that transported classified equipment and personnel for sensitive missions. Such aircraft had priority over normal traffic due to security considerations that superseded routine operational procedures. Air Force Cargo 77, you are cleared for immediate approach, runway 21. Contact approach control on frequency 119.7. Rodriguez coordinated the approach for the classified cargo aircraft while simultaneously managing the remaining corporate jet and preparing for runway closure. The workload was intense, but his performance remained flawless as years of training and experience guided his actions. The cargo aircraft landed successfully and taxied immediately to a secure parking area where armed security personnel were waiting. The classified materials on board required special handling procedures that had been coordinated with base security forces during the approach phase. Tower, this is Gulfstream. November 23, Alpha requesting immediate landing, transmitted the corporate jet pilot. We have sufficient fuel for diversion, but request landing at McConnell due to passenger medical emergency. Kane hesitated. Medical emergencies normally receive priority handling, but runway conditions were now approaching the absolute limits for safe operations. The decision to allow one more landing would expose the aircraft to risks that might exceed acceptable safety margins. Gulfstream, November 2-3. Alpha, state the nature of medical emergency. Tower, we have a passenger experiencing cardiac arrest. We need immediate ground transportation to medical facilities. The medical emergency created an ethical dilemma that had no clear answer. Allowing the aircraft to land would expose them to dangerous wind conditions, but forcing them to divert might result in the passenger's death due to delayed medical treatment. Esther studied the weather radar and wind readings, calculating the risks associated with one final approach. The wind speeds were at the very edge of acceptable limits, but a skilled pilot could probably manage a safe landing if approach guidance was precise and emergency services were positioned for immediate assistance. Kane, the winds are borderline but manageable for one more approach, she advised. If they abort after starting the approach, we close the runway immediately. Kane made the decision that would haunt him for years. Gulfstream, November 2. 3 Alpha, you are cleared for immediate approach runway 21. Be advised winds are at maximum limits for safe operations. You may execute missed approach if conditions appear unsafe. Gulfstream, November 2-3. Alpha cleared for approach. We accept the risk due to medical emergency. Rodriguez provided approach guidance for the corporate jet, while Kane coordinated with medical personnel for immediate response upon landing. Emergency vehicles were positioned along the runway to provide assistance if the aircraft experienced difficulties during the approach. The Gulfstream fought through the turbulent approach, wings rocking violently as the pilot struggled to maintain control in the severe crosswinds. Wind shear alarms activated twice during the final approach phase, but the experienced crew managed to maintain safe flight parameters through superior airmanship. The aircraft touched down hard but safely, immediately turning off the runway toward the medical evacuation area where ambulances were waiting. The passenger with cardiac arrest was quickly transferred to ground medical facilities, potentially saving their life through the crew's willingness to accept increased risk. All aircraft, this is McConnell Tower, Kane announced with finality. Runway operations are now closed due to extreme weather conditions. No further aircraft will be cleared for approach until weather conditions improve. The announcement marked the end of one of the most challenging nights in McConnell's operational history. 15 aircraft had been safely recovered despite hurricane conditions that had pushed equipment and personnel beyond normal operational limits. The success rate was extraordinary considering the severity of the weather and the complexity of the coordination required. But Kane's relief was tempered by growing awareness that the night's success had depended heavily on Esther Williams's expertise and guidance. Her combat controller background had provided tactical insights that proved crucial for managing multiple emergency situations under extreme pressure. Rodriguez began securing radio equipment and preparing the tower for hurricane-force winds that would arrive within the next hour. Emergency power systems were activated, backup communications were tested, and personnel were briefed on shelter procedures for riding out the storm's passage. Major Stevens approached Kane with a serious expression that suggested important business. Colonel, I need to discuss personnel performance evaluations based on tonight's operations. Several people demonstrated exceptional competence under pressure. Kane knew Stevens was referring to Esther Williams, whose contributions had been instrumental in achieving successful aircraft recovery rates that exceeded normal expectations. Her expertise had prevented multiple disasters while saving hundreds of lives through professional air traffic control guidance. Major, tonight's operations involved unusual circumstances that may not reflect normal performance standards, Kane replied carefully. Sir, with respect, exceptional performance under extreme pressure is exactly what we need to evaluate in our personnel. Tonight demonstrated who can be counted on when lives are at stake. Stevens' implication was clear. Esther Williams had proven her value through actions rather than words, while Kane's personal animosity had nearly compromised mission success. The political ramifications could be significant if higher headquarters learned about the performance disparities. As if summoned by their conversation, the Base Communications Center called the tower with an urgent message. "Tower, this is Base Communications. We have a priority message from Air Combat Command requiring immediate response from Colonel Kane." Kane took the encrypted phone call in his private office, leaving the tower crew to continue shutdown procedures. The conversation lasted nearly 10 minutes, during which his expression shifted from confidence to concern to outright alarm. When Kane returned to the main control room, his demeanor had changed completely. The arrogant authority that had characterized his leadership style was replaced by something approaching humility, mixed with what appeared to be genuine fear. "Williams," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately about the Ghostwing incident." Esther followed Kane to his office, wondering what information Air Combat Command had provided that could cause such a dramatic change in his attitude. The encrypted communication had clearly contained details that put the evening's events in a different perspective. Kane closed the office door and activated the white noise generator used for classified discussions. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out a file folder marked with security classifications that Esther had not seen since her combat controller days. "The Ghostwing flight was not just using an unauthorized call sign," Kane began, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were part of a classified test program that has been operating under special authority from the Secretary of the Air Force." Esther felt her stomach tighten as Kane continued his explanation. Classified test programs often involved experimental aircraft and procedures that were hidden from normal operational oversight. If she had unknowingly become involved in such activities, the security implications could be serious. "The test program is evaluating advanced combat controller techniques developed by Major Tom Williams before his death," Kane continued. "His training methods and tactical innovations are being incorporated into classified programs that require operational secrecy." The revelation hit Esther like a physical blow. Her husband's work had continued after his death, influencing Air Force operations in ways she had never imagined. The Ghostwing call sign was not just someone honoring his memory, it was an active program carrying forward his tactical innovations. Kane pulled out a photograph from the classified file and placed it on his desk. The image showed 6 F-16 aircraft in formation, but what made Esther's blood run cold was the pilot visible in the lead aircraft's cockpit. Even with the helmet and oxygen mask obscuring his features, she recognized the posture and hand positions that were unmistakably familiar. "That is Major Tom Williams in the lead aircraft," Kane said quietly. "This photograph was taken 3 weeks ago during a classified test mission." Esther stared at the photograph with growing disbelief. Tom Williams had died 2 years ago in an aircraft accident that had been witnessed by multiple people and thoroughly investigated by Air Force safety teams. The idea that he was still alive was impossible to accept, yet the evidence was literally in front of her eyes. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I attended Tom's funeral. I received the flag from his casket. The Air Force officially notified me of his death." Kane's expression showed sympathy, mixed with the weight of carrying classified information that had destroyed families and ruined careers. The aircraft accident was real, but Tom survived with severe injuries that required extensive medical treatment and reconstructive surgery. His survival was classified due to the sensitive nature of his work. The explanation continued to devastate Esther's understanding of the past 2 years. Her grief, her struggles with Kane's persecution, her efforts to honor Tom's memory, all of it had been based on a lie designed to protect classified operations that she was never supposed to learn about. "Why was I not told?" she demanded, her voice rising despite the need for secrecy. "I am his wife. I had security clearances. Why was I allowed to believe he was dead?" Kane's response revealed the ruthless calculations that drove national security decisions. Tom's work was so sensitive that even family members could not be informed of his survival. The fake death provided perfect cover for his continued operations while protecting him from potential retaliation by foreign intelligence services. Esther felt her world collapsing as she realized the implications. For 2 years, she had been carrying Tom's challenge coin as a memorial to a dead husband who was actually alive and working on classified programs. Her grief had been manufactured by security requirements that valued operational secrecy over human relationships. "Where is he now?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to learn the answer. Kane consulted the classified file before responding. "Tom is currently assigned to a special operations unit that conducts classified test missions throughout the Pacific Theater. His identity remains hidden under operational cover that prevents normal family contact." The revelation explained why the Ghostwing call sign had been used during the night's emergency operations. Tom Williams was still alive, still flying, and still using the tactical innovations that had made him legendary among combat controllers. The voice she had heard on the radio was not an imposter. It was her husband coordinating emergency operations from aircraft she had helped guide to safety. Esther struggled to process the emotional impact of learning that her husband was alive after 2 years of mourning his death. Relief at his survival competed with anger at the deception, while professional pride in their coordinated efforts was overshadowed by questions about their future together. Kane continued reading from the classified file, revealing details that explained many of the mysteries surrounding the evening's events. "Tom has been monitoring your career since the fake death notification. He requested that you be assigned to McConnell specifically because he knew classified operations might require your expertise as backup support." The manipulation was staggering in its scope and implications. Esther's assignment to McConnell, Kane's hostility toward her qualifications, even the timing of the Ghostwing emergency, all of it had been orchestrated to maintain operational security while positioning her where she could provide critical support if needed. "My court-martial was fake as well?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The court-martial was real, but the charges were manufactured to provide justification for your transfer to a position where you could maintain your skills while remaining available for classified support missions." Kane's admission revealed the depth of the conspiracy that had controlled her life for the past 2 years. Her professional reputation had been deliberately destroyed to serve operational requirements that she was never supposed to understand. The humiliation and career damage had been collateral damage in a classified program that valued mission success over individual welfare. Esther pulled out the challenge coin that she had carried as a memorial to her dead husband and examined it with new understanding. The coin was not a memento of the past. It was a communication device that had been designed to signal her involvement in classified operations when circumstances required her expertise. "Does Tom know that I am aware of his survival?" she asked. Kane nodded grimly. "He monitored tonight's tower operations through classified communication channels. Your performance during the emergency coordination was observed and evaluated by Air Combat Command personnel who were assessing your continued suitability for classified support roles." The revelation that her husband had been watching her work while she believed him to be dead added another layer of emotional complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Their professional coordination during the emergency had been a reunion conducted under false pretenses that neither could acknowledge publicly. Kane closed the classified file and returned it to his secure storage area. "Air Combat Command has directed me to restore your emergency controller qualifications immediately. Your performance tonight demonstrated capabilities that may be required for future classified operations." The restoration of her qualifications represented professional vindication, but Esther could not feel satisfaction, knowing that it was motivated by operational necessity rather than recognition of her abilities. She had proven herself through expert performance, only to learn that the test had been orchestrated by people who already knew her capabilities. "What happens now?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would be as manipulated as everything else in her recent life. Kane's response confirmed her fears. "You will resume normal air traffic control duties while maintaining availability for special assignment as required by classified operations. Your security clearances will be reactivated, and you will receive briefings on procedures for supporting future missions." The offer represented everything she had wanted professionally, but the circumstances made acceptance feel like collaboration with the people who had destroyed her life through deliberate deception. She would be working for the same organization that had faked her husband's death and manufactured charges against her to serve operational requirements. As Kane explained the administrative procedures for restoring her qualifications, Esther's mind was processing the broader implications of what she had learned. Tom was alive but hidden behind operational security that prevented normal contact. Her career could be restored, but only as part of a classified program that valued her skills while disregarding her personal welfare. The hurricane outside the tower had reached the base, bringing with it winds that exceeded 160 miles per hour. Emergency power systems activated, as commercial electrical service failed throughout the region. The tower crew took shelter in reinforced areas designed to protect personnel during extreme weather events. But the storm outside paled in comparison to the emotional hurricane that Esther was experiencing as she struggled to understand how her life had been manipulated by classified operations. The relief of learning that Tom was alive competed with anger at the deception, while professional opportunities conflicted with personal betrayal. As the eye wall passed directly over McConnell Air Force Base, bringing a temporary calm that would last only minutes before the backside of the storm arrived, Esther made a decision that would determine her future relationship with the Air Force and her husband. Commander Ellis activated secure digital tablet with biometric authentication and encrypted communication capability to coordinate sensitive personnel transfers and clearance reinstatements across multiple security agencies during classified operation transitions, requiring real-time documentation. She would accept the restoration of her qualifications and return to emergency controller duties, but not because she trusted the people who had manipulated her life. She would do it because pilots needed expert guidance to survive dangerous situations, regardless of the political games being played by their superiors. The classified programs could use her skills, but they could not control her motivations or her commitment to saving lives through professional excellence. She would serve the mission while protecting herself from further manipulation by people who valued operational security over human relationships. Kane watched her face as she processed the implications of what she had learned. His own career was now dependent on her cooperation with classified requirements that he barely understood. The arrogance that had characterized his leadership style was gone, replaced by awareness that he was merely another piece in games played by people far above his security level. "Williams," he said quietly, "I need to apologize for my treatment of you over the past 2 years. I thought I was protecting operational security, but I realize now that I was being used to manufacture justification for decisions that had already been made at much higher levels." His apology was genuine, but inadequate for the damage that had been done to her career and personal life. Esther acknowledged his words with a nod, but offered no forgiveness for persecution that had caused unnecessary suffering while serving no legitimate purpose. The storm's eye passed over the base, bringing an eerie calm that allowed them to assess the damage caused by the hurricane's passage. Aircraft that had been secured before the storm arrived were intact, but several buildings had sustained roof damage from debris and fallen trees. Communication systems had been affected by the storm, but backup networks maintained contact with higher headquarters and aircraft that might need assistance once weather conditions improved. The tower crew prepared for the resumption of flight operations that would be required as soon as the storm moved away from the base. But first, they had to survive the backside of the hurricane, which would bring winds from the opposite direction with intensity that could exceed the initial passage. The most dangerous part of the storm was yet to come, testing their shelter procedures and emergency equipment under conditions that pushed everything beyond normal design limits. As the winds began to increase again, signaling the approach of the hurricane's trailing edge, Esther reflected on the night's revelations and their implications for her future. Tom was alive but hidden behind security requirements that prevented normal contact. Her career could be restored, but only as part of operations that had already demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice individual welfare for mission requirements. The challenge coin in her pocket now represented something entirely different from what she had believed for 2 years. Instead of a memorial to a dead husband, it was a symbol of operational connections that transcended normal military relationships. Tom was still fighting, still flying, and still using the innovations that had made him legendary among combat controllers. Their coordination during the Ghostwing emergency had been a professional reunion, conducted under circumstances that neither could acknowledge. They had worked together to save lives while maintaining operational security that prevented recognition of their personal relationship. As the hurricane's backside reached the base with renewed fury, Esther made peace with the complexities of her situation. She would accept the restoration of her qualifications while maintaining emotional distance from people who had proven their willingness to manipulate her life for operational purposes. The classified programs needed her skills, but she would serve the mission rather than the organization. Pilots required expert guidance regardless of the political games being played by their superiors, and her commitment to professional excellence transcended personal grievances with security requirements. Kane monitored weather conditions while coordinating with base emergency services for damage assessment and recovery operations. His leadership style had been permanently changed by the night's revelations about classified operations that had manipulated his understanding of personnel issues for the past 2 years. Rodriguez and Hayes continued their normal duties while remaining unaware of the classified discussions that had taken place in Kane's office. Their professional performance during the emergency operations had been exceptional, demonstrating the kind of teamwork that made successful outcomes possible under extreme pressure. The hurricane gradually moved away from McConnell Air Force Base, leaving behind damaged buildings and disrupted operations that would require days to restore fully. But the human cost had been minimal due to expert emergency coordination that had saved multiple aircraft and hundreds of lives during the storm's passage. Flight operations would resume once weather conditions improved and runway damage could be assessed. Aircraft recovery teams would begin retrieving planes that had been diverted to alternate airports, while maintenance crews would evaluate storm damage to equipment and facilities. As dawn approached, bringing the first sunlight that McConnell had seen in over 12 hours, Esther prepared to resume her duties as a qualified emergency controller. The night had tested her skills, revealed painful truths about her personal life, and demonstrated the continuing importance of professional excellence regardless of organizational politics. Kane approached her as the storm's intensity continued to diminish. "Williams, your emergency controller qualifications will be officially restored as of 0800 hours today. You will be designated as Senior Controller for Special Operations Support, reporting directly to Major Stevens for classified mission coordination." The assignment represented professional vindication and career advancement, but Esther accepted it with the understanding that her value to the organization was based on operational necessity rather than recognition of her personal worth. She would serve the mission while protecting herself from further emotional manipulation. "Thank you, sir," she replied formally. "I am ready to resume emergency controller duties as required." Her response was professional and correct, but it lacked the enthusiasm that might have characterized someone who had not learned how extensively their life had been manipulated for operational purposes. She would do her job with expert competence while maintaining emotional distance from people who had proven their willingness to sacrifice individual welfare for mission requirements. As the sun rose over the storm-damaged base, casting long shadows across runways that would soon resume operations, Esther Williams stood at the window of the control tower and reflected on the night's revelations. Tom was alive somewhere in the Pacific Theater, conducting classified missions that required operational secrecy. Their professional relationship would continue through emergency coordination and tactical support, even if personal contact remained restricted by security requirements. The Ghost Wing call sign would return when operational circumstances required her expertise, bringing with it the voice of a husband who was legally dead, but professionally very much alive. Their marriage existed in a classified realm that transcended normal relationships, connected by shared expertise and mutual commitment to mission success. Kane watched her from across the control room, aware that his future evaluations would depend partly on her willingness to support classified operations, despite the personal cost she had paid for organizational deception. His leadership style would need to change dramatically if he hoped to maintain the cooperation of personnel who would learn not to trust official explanations. The radio crackled with the first transmission since the hurricane's passage, as aircraft began requesting weather updates and approach clearances for resuming normal operations. McConnell Air Force Base was returning to life after surviving one of the most challenging nights in its operational history. McConnell Tower, this is Air Force Heavy 2-1, requesting current weather conditions and runway status for approach clearance. Rodriguez handled the transmission with his characteristic professionalism, providing updated weather information and coordinating for the resumption of flight operations. The tower crew was returning to normal duties, but they would never forget the night that had tested every aspect of their training and experience. Esther took her position at the emergency frequency console, ready to handle whatever challenges the new day might bring. Her skills had been proven under extreme pressure, her qualifications had been restored through expert performance, and her commitment to professional excellence remained unchanged despite personal revelations that had shattered her understanding of the past 2 years. The challenge coin in her pocket had taken on new meaning as a symbol of operational connections that transcended normal military relationships. Tom was still out there somewhere, still flying, still using the tactical innovations that had made him legendary among combat controllers. As the first aircraft of the new day approached McConnell Air Force Base, Esther Williams prepared to guide them safely through whatever emergencies might arise. The storm had passed, but her real work was just beginning, in a career that had been restored through performance under pressure. The Ghost Wing call sign would return when circumstances required, bringing with it professional challenges and personal complexities that she was now prepared to handle, with the wisdom gained through surviving organizational deception and operational manipulation. She had learned that some truths were classified, some relationships existed beyond normal boundaries, and some skills were valuable enough to justify extraordinary measures for their preservation. The Air Force needed her expertise, and she would provide it while protecting herself from further emotional manipulation by people who valued mission success over individual welfare. Kane issued the first operations order of the new day, formally restoring Esther's emergency controller qualifications and assigning her to special operations support duties. The administrative action represented the resolution of conflicts that had dominated tower operations for 2 years, but it also marked the beginning of new challenges that would test everyone involved. As McConnell Air Force Base resumed normal operations under clear skies and diminishing winds, the lessons learned during the hurricane would influence emergency procedures and personnel policies for years to come. The night had demonstrated that expertise and professionalism could overcome personal conflicts when lives were at stake. Rodriguez logged the completion of emergency operations and began normal tower duties as aircraft returned to routine approach patterns. Hayes resumed her position with increased confidence, earned through performance under extreme pressure. Kane prepared for meetings with higher headquarters that would evaluate his leadership during the crisis. But for Esther Williams, the new day represented something more complex than simple return to normal operations. She had learned that her husband was alive, that her career had been manipulated for operational purposes, and that her skills were valuable enough to justify extraordinary deception by people she had trusted. The sun climbed higher over the storm-damaged base as maintenance crews began assessing facility damage and preparing for full operational capability. Aircraft that had been diverted during the hurricane were returning to their home base, guided by controllers who had proven their competence under the most challenging conditions imaginable. In a secure communication facility miles away from McConnell Air Force Base, Major Tom Williams completed his post-mission briefing on the night's classified operations. His survival remained hidden behind operational security requirements, but his pride in his wife's performance was evident to the debriefing officers who had monitored the emergency coordination. The Ghost Wing program would continue its classified mission, supported by tactical innovations that bore Tom Williams' signature in emergency coordination, provided by controllers who understood the true cost of operational secrecy. Some relationships existed beyond normal boundaries, connected by shared expertise and mutual commitment to mission success. Esther Williams had survived the storm, both meteorological and personal, emerging with restored qualifications and hard-earned wisdom about the price of serving classified operations. The challenge coin in her pocket would always remind her that some truths were classified, some losses were manufactured, and some skills were valuable enough to justify extraordinary measures for their preservation. As the morning progressed and normal flight operations resumed at McConnell Air Force Base, the radio remained ready for the next emergency that would test the skills and dedication of controllers who had proven their worth under impossible conditions. The Ghost Wing call sign would return when circumstances required, bringing with it professional challenges that transcended personal relationships. The storm had passed, leaving behind damaged buildings but intact spirit among people who had discovered that expertise and dedication could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. McConnell Air Force Base was ready for whatever missions lay ahead, supported by controllers who understood that some duties required sacrifices that could never be fully explained or adequately rewarded. In the growing daylight, as the last traces of the hurricane disappeared over the eastern horizon, Esther Williams stood ready to handle the next emergency call. She had learned that honor could be restored through performance under pressure, that standards were maintained through quiet dedication, and that some wings continued to fly even when officially grounded. The Ghost Wing legacy lived on through tactical innovations and emergency coordination that saved lives while serving missions that remained classified. Tom Williams had trained her well for challenges that neither of them could have anticipated, and his influence continued through controllers who understood that real strength came through quiet discipline and professional excellence. As the radio crackled with routine traffic and normal operations resumed across the base, one truth remained constant through all the deception and manipulation. When aircraft needed guidance through dangerous situations, expert controllers would be ready to provide it, regardless of personal cost or organizational politics. The challenge coin in Esther's pocket caught the morning sunlight as she reached for the radio microphone to handle the next approach clearance. Ghostwing would fly again when duty called, guided by controllers who had learned to serve the mission while protecting themselves from people who valued operational security over human relationships. Some secrets were classified, some relationships existed beyond normal boundaries, and some skills were valuable enough to justify extraordinary measures for their preservation. The storm had revealed these truths while testing everyone involved in ways that would influence their careers for years to come. McConnell Tower, Ghostwing requesting clearance for future operations. Standards maintained. Mission continues. The transmission came through on a frequency that only qualified controllers could access, carrying with it the promise that somewhere in the classified realm of special operations, Tom Williams continued the work that had made him legendary among combat controllers. His wife would be ready when the mission required her expertise, serving with professional excellence while maintaining emotional distance from organizational politics. The Ghostwing call sign would return when circumstances demanded the kind of expert coordination that could only be provided by controllers who understood that some duties transcended normal relationships. Until then, Esther Williams would handle routine emergencies with the same dedication she had shown during the hurricane, proving that honor could be restored through quiet service and professional competence. As the sun rose higher over McConnell Air Force Base, bringing warmth and light after the long night of storm and revelation, the morning air carried the scent of rain-washed concrete and the distant hum of maintenance crews beginning their damage assessment. The control tower windows, streaked with remnants of the hurricane's fury, reflected golden rays that painted the runway in hues of amber and hope. Emergency vehicles continued their methodical patrol of the flight line, checking for debris that might pose hazards to returning aircraft operations. Esther stood at her console, fingers unconsciously tracing the worn edges of the challenge coin that had taken on such profound new meaning. The metal was warm from her touch, bearing the weight of secrets that had shaped 2 years of manufactured grief and professional exile. Around her, the tower crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had been tested beyond normal limits and emerged stronger for the experience. Rodriguez was updating weather logs with meticulous care, documenting wind speeds and pressure readings that would become part of the official record of the night's operations. His 20 years of experience had never included anything comparable to the coordination challenges they had faced, yet his performance had been flawless when lives hung in the balance. The respect in his eyes when he looked at Esther now carried recognition that transcended rank and protocol. Staff Sergeant Hayes worked at her station with newfound confidence, the uncertainties that had marked her earlier performance replaced by the steady competence that came from surviving genuine emergencies. She had grown professionally during the long night, learning lessons that no training manual could provide about the real weight of responsibility in air traffic control. Her radio transmissions carried authority that had been earned through trial by fire. Kane moved through the control room with subdued demeanor that reflected his awareness of how completely the night's events had challenged his assumptions about leadership and personnel management. The classified revelations had stripped away his arrogance, leaving behind someone who finally understood that expertise mattered more than personal prejudices when lives were at stake. His future effectiveness would depend on learning from mistakes that had nearly compromised mission success. Major Stevens observed the morning transition with professional satisfaction, tempered by awareness of the complex human dynamics that had been revealed during the crisis. His evaluation reports would need to capture extraordinary performance under pressure while respecting the classified aspects of operations that most personnel could never fully understand. The balance between recognition and security requirements would challenge his administrative skills. Outside the tower, the base was awakening to assess the hurricane's impact on facilities and equipment. Maintenance crews worked systematically through checklists designed to ensure flight safety after extreme weather events. Aircraft that had been secured in reinforced hangars were being inspected for wind damage, while runways were cleared of debris that ranged from tree branches to pieces of roofing material torn from distant buildings. The communication center had restored full connectivity with higher headquarters and alternate airports, allowing coordination for the return of aircraft that had been diverted during the storm. Flight schedules would need to be rebuilt from scratch, with priority given to medical evacuations and mission-critical cargo that had been delayed by weather conditions. Emergency services personnel were transitioning from storm response to normal readiness status, their equipment and vehicles having performed flawlessly during the night's multiple crises. The coordination between tower controllers and ground emergency teams had demonstrated the kind of seamless integration that saved lives when seconds mattered more than procedures. Base housing areas had sustained minor damage from fallen trees and power outages, but no personnel had been seriously injured during the hurricane's passage. Family members who had waited through the long night in reinforced shelters were beginning to emerge into daylight that brought relief and the promise of normal routines resuming. The meteorology office was analyzing storm data that would contribute to improved forecasting models for future hurricane tracking. The intensity and path changes that had caught weather services by surprise would be studied extensively to enhance warning systems that protected military installations throughout hurricane-prone regions. As morning progressed, civilian air traffic began returning to normal patterns as airports throughout the region assessed their operational status. The cascade of diversions and emergency landings that had stretched resources beyond normal limits was gradually resolving as alternate facilities reopened and aircraft resumed their original flight plans. Food service personnel in the base dining facility were preparing for increased demand as personnel who had worked through the night would need meals before transitioning to normal duty schedules. The community aspects of military life reasserted themselves as people shared stories of the night's challenges and celebrated successful outcomes that reflected collective effort and professional competence. Medical facilities were treating minor injuries sustained during the storm response, but the excellent coordination of emergency operations had prevented the serious casualties that might have resulted from less effective crisis management. The integration of air traffic control expertise with ground emergency response had created safety margins that protected both aircrew and passengers during critical approach phases. Security forces had maintained their vigilance throughout the storm, protecting classified assets and ensuring that emergency operations did not compromise operational security requirements. The balance between mission necessity and security protocols had been maintained despite pressure to expedite procedures during life-threatening situations. Engineering teams were evaluating structural damage to determine which facilities required immediate repair versus those that could wait for normal maintenance schedules. The tower itself had performed admirably, its reinforced construction proving adequate for sustained hurricane-force winds, while maintaining the environmental controls necessary for sensitive electronic equipment. Administrative personnel were beginning the complex process of documenting the night's operations for official records and lessons learned reports that would influence future emergency procedures. The successful coordination of multiple simultaneous crises would become a case study for air traffic control training programs throughout the military. The flight line was gradually returning to normal activity as aircraft maintenance crews completed their post-storm inspections and prepared planes for resuming operational schedules. The precision and dedication of ground personnel had been as crucial as controller expertise in achieving successful outcomes during the crisis. As routine operations resumed around the base, the psychological impact of the night's revelations continued to influence the relationships and dynamics within the tower crew. Trust had been tested, competence had been proven, and professional bonds had been strengthened through shared experiences that few people would ever fully understand. The radio stood ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, its frequencies monitored by controllers who had learned that emergency coordination required more than technical knowledge. It demanded the kind of judgment and dedication that could only be developed through genuine commitment to serving others. Ghostwing would fly again when duty called, guided by controllers who had learned that real strength came through serving others, regardless of personal cost.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our EV Story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.